My dear Camilla, regularly in the afternoon, a few motifs occur to me for those beautiful little poems about the gypsy love. Although I am getting on in years, I have a feeling that a new vein is beginning to grow in my work.
Przez perzacielne leliki chodzi bez nazolań. Leża po mnie zolboka. Tak znesla sa przespeń. A tak mi w lawie ostala. Przez celuczki.
This is a mystery story. It took place here 80 years ago in the quiet Czech backwater of Moravia. It's about forbidden love, strange disappearances, and a secret that's been hidden for more than 50 years. It's this secret I've come to Moravia to try and understand. In 1917, the great Czech composer Leoš Janáček met and fell in love with a married woman. Her name was Kamila Štěslava. Janáček was 63, Camilla 25. Only a few days after meeting her, haunted by the encounter, he launched into composing a song cycle about a young farmer who was seduced by a gypsy girl and ran off with her. The text which inspired him was a strange collection of anonymous poems published in a local newspaper. They were entitled From the Pen of a Self-Taught Man. Janáček called his cycle The Diary of One Who Disappeared.
Ta czerna cyganka kolemca pozmieta. Ach, satani drży, ach, satani drży. Do czterej do świata, do czterej do świata.
I've been involved with this piece for 5 years. I first sang it for English National Opera in a staged production directed by Deborah Warner, which we then toured around the world. And of course I did a fair amount of research at the time. But it wasn't until I decided to come here, to the Moravian capital of Brno, that I began to dig deeper into the mysteries behind its composition. All the evidence is here, not only the letters to Camilla, which you can now buy in English translation, but also Janáček's sketches and diaries. And before I left London, I asked Janáček's biographer, John Tyrrell, how the composer was first inspired to write the piece.
The first thing that happened was that the poems were published in the local Brno newspaper. These were published in 2 instalments, anonymously published, and they purported to be written by a young man who had gone off and left these poems describing why he'd gone off. And there's been a mystery about the authorship of the poems, which was only resolved much, much later.
John Tyrrell told me about one mystery, but there are at least 2. The mystery of the poems and the mystery of Janáček's fascination with them. I wanted to start my research here, in the countryside around the village of Hukvaldi. This is the first time I've visited Janacek's birthplace, to which he returned in the last years of his life. Hukvaldi lies at the foot of a wooded hill, and Janacek rebuilt a house here. It sits in a landscape very much like the one where the gypsy lies in wait for her farmer lover in the third song of the diary.
Ne czekaj, ne widu, ne dam ja zaslakat, no serabi pote, mama miękko plaka. Miesiczek zachodzi już, nic widzieć nie. Kto si stoi w naszym znamieniu. Twoje світелька заршила до nocy. Panie Boże, nie daj, stoi mi ku pomocy.
So was this just the obsession of an older man for an attractive younger woman? When I visited Janacek's house, I asked the curator Karol Dochnal for his opinion.
Já když si uvědomíme, že Zdenka v podstatě byla spíš taková, jednak byla velmi mladá, když se vdávala, neměla ještě 16, no a potom v podstatě si musela na styl života Leoš podle mého názoru víceméně zvykat. A nebyla nikdy takovou nějakou dominantní osobou v tom manželství, tím pádem možná mu neposkytoval ani takovou inspiraci, z toho potom se odvíjela, vlastně hledal inspirace v podstatě sám. Vztah s Kamilou Šteslovou, to je taková vlastně poslední kapitola v života Leoše Janáčka. A on vlastně jako člověk, který se chce podělit s určitými pocity s člověkem, s ženou, že, která ho inspiruje. Vlastně to se nám ani nepřísluší odsuzovat nebo vůbec soudit nebo o tom hovořit, protože je to v podstatě jednoduché. Ten jeho genius ho někam táhl, on zatím šel, tím je řečeno všem. Kdyby zatím nešel, tak, nebo nežil tak, jak žil, tak nenapsal, co napsal. Že? To jako v podstatě bez komentáře bych ponechal.
Už mladé vlaštovky ven z děver noží. Ležal ten zero noc jako na trnoži. Už saj svítání na nebi patrní. Ležal ten zero noc jako na hivtrní.
U ní obdivoval, že vlastně takto žije rodinným životem, že se obětuje pro rodinu, že miluje svého manžela, své 2 syny. A tím to vlastně začalo, že on byla taková čistá duše. On jako bezdětný v podstatě, nebo lépe řečeno, prožil tragédii osobní největší, ztratil obě děti. Tam viděl určitou vlastně rodinu nebo určité rodiny štěstí.
That's something I hadn't reckoned with. One of the things that fascinates Janacek about his young gypsy Camila is that she's a mother. Janacek has lost both his son Vladimir and his daughter Olga to illness. When Olga died, he was staying here in a cottage in his home village of Hugvaldi. The cottage was rented from the local forester, and Karel Dochnal and my colleagues from Brno suggested I should meet the forester's grandson, Karel Jacques. He still lives in the cottage, treasuring the mementos which Janacek left here for his grandfather.
Tak v prvé řadě to jsou ty hodinky. Ty hodinky jsou ještě na klíček, to se natahovalo, jo? Na klíček. Tady je medailonka, krásný foto.
How old is she in this photograph?
Ona zemřela ve 22 letech, 18, 19, tak asi. To nemůžu přesně říct. Zemřela ve 22 a tady, jenomže já jsem si nevzal brýle, prosím vás. Že tady jsou vlásky jeho dcery Olgy, která mu zemřela.
Olga was in St. Petersburg when she developed the infection which killed her. Mr. Jacques showed me a postcard Janacek sent to the forester, giving him the news.
Olga naše umírá a naposled vás všechny pozdravuje. Už se nepodepsal Janacek, jenom to poslal. 24.2.1903.
Janacek's letters speak of the shadow Olga's death cast over his rural retreat. They also reveal that it was here, not Brno, that he wanted to bring his gypsy, to his woods, his landscape.
The sun, when it comes out, gives warmth here as if quite near. If I had power over you, I'd bring you here at once for your health.
Tak samozřejmě mě několikrát zval na Ukvaly, protože se s ní chtěl podělit o ty krásy tady z ukvalské přírody. Tak žil, nebyl to člověk, který si stavil nějaké vzdušné zámky a ten citový vztah ke Kamile Štěslové byl naprosto
But what about those poems which so captured Janacek's imagination in the weeks after he met Camilla? Where did the mystery John Tyrrell talked about originate? This is the place to find out, the Janacek archive. As well as all the manuscripts, there are also the texts he said, including those poems published in the local Brno newspaper. The curator of the Janacek Foundation is Dr. Aliena Nemtsova.
The poems were published in 1916, in May, a week before the premiere of Jenufa in Prague. Janacek was very busy in Prague.
Yes.
But he cut off the poem from the Lidové noviny, and he put it into his desk or on his desk. And a year later, he came to Luhačovice, and he met at the first time Camila there.
Yes.
And after coming back to Brno, as a first letter to Camila, Janacek mentioned that he is working on the songs about this beautiful gypsy.
I asked the Czech Republic's foremost Janacek scholar Miloš Štědron to join me in the archives and help me in my search.
Myslím si, že ten nápad byl fantastický, zmocnit se toho dokumentu novinového a že v tom je to asi nové, že to je v podstatě jako patří to úplně do 20. století. Že Janacek v té době samozřejmě hledal cestu k moderní hudbě a je to v době přelomové, kdy už začal být znám po vídeňské premiéře Pastorkyně.
That's not surprising, but when he began to sketch the diary, did Janacek really believe that those verses were written by a self-taught farmer?
You know, somebody believed that it could be a folk poet, but somebody said probably it was some experienced poet. But because it wasn't discovered, the writer, so it stayed as anonymous. I think that for Janacek was most important the beauty of the poems, which are very near to folk poetry.
It's the same with the poems which Schubert set to music in Winterreise or by Wilhelm Müller. The title of the book of poems is From the Notes of a Travelling Horn Player, and again it's a sort of fiction that they're by somebody, though in fact we know who they are by.
Nobody knows in the time when the poem was published, nobody knows who was the author.
But Aliena Nemtsova knows, because she's found one clue hiding behind the newspaper story. The editor's note which accompanies the poems is mentioned in a book in her own library. In the memoirs of a writer called Olga Calder, a contemporary of Janacek, he refers to the newspaper in a letter to a friend.
A note in the postscript, he asked the friend if he had read in Lidové noviny from the day of 17th and 21st of May, from the pen of the self-taught man. I make some escamotage, which means some what the illusionists make an illusion.
Right, yeah,
you know.
Yeah, like a conjuring trick. Or
yes. And so he said that I was the author of the text, which Janacek set in music. Yeah. So the mystery of the author is clean now.
Yes. Do we know if Calder ever heard the piece?
No, he couldn't.
He couldn't have
because
heard it.
he died 3 months before the diary was performed.
Right. And Dr. Nemtsova told me of one more strange coincidence. Olga Calder came from a village near the spa town of Luhačovice, where Janacek first met Camilla. It's still a spa, a place where people go to relax, lose their inhibitions, indulge in a little harmless dalliance. According to the biographers, Janacek met Camilla at the Slovatska Buda wine house. But Miloš Štědron has evidence that he first saw her a few days earlier.
Janáček a Camila se viděli z největší pravděpodobností poprvé v Luhačovickém hostinci u Vepřeku, kde asi to bylo tak, že Camila Janáčka zaujala zvukově, protože ho vždycky zajímaly zajímavé hlasy a notoval si je, psal nápěvky mluví. A toto je typický nápěvek mluví a tady je poznamenáno, že to bylo večer u Vepřeku 8. července 1917 a je tady napsáno píce paní Camila a je napsán přímo nápěvek mluví jejího hlasu.
Dear Madam, accept these few roses as a token of my unbounded esteem for you. You're so lovely in character that in your company one's spirits are lifted. You will not believe how glad I am that I've met you. Happy you. All the more painful I feel my own desolation and bitter fate.
And that's how, 6 weeks later, Camilla becomes the inspiration for the first of an unbroken series of masterpieces. Janacek, back in Hugvaldi, has reinvented her as his muse.
Spíš bych to viděl z hlediska toho rituálu nápěvku mluví, protože on neustále zachycuje realitu, reaguje na realitu a vždycky si najde nějakou záminku. Tady byla permanentní záminkou ta Camila a potom se to stávalo obsesí a řekl bych, že poslední 3-4 roky už je Camila naprosto ve všem.
We're talking about a composer who has not had a very happy life with his wife, who has in fact divorced his wife in a rather strange ceremony earlier that year. It's not a proper divorce through the court, but it's a divorce arranged by a couple of lawyers so that Janacek and his wife live together in the same house. He pays her money, she cooks his food, but they live separate lives. And of course this is a piece about someone going off with the Gypsies, someone abandoning his rather safe life for uncharted territories, and I'm sure that had an attraction for him.
Yes, Gypsies. We mustn't forget that the story, and Janacek managed to convince himself it was a true story, is about a sexual liaison with a social outcast. When Czechs use the word gypsy, they don't mean something romantic and distant. Gypsies are here and now. You can see them here in Brno in a few streets near the Ring Road, and now in the 21st century. The Roma are still a significant minority group with powerful traditions, but also social problems. In Brno, they're starting to address those problems, and in the process giving the Roma their own cultural centre. It has an archive, a collection of gypsy artefacts, and there's a dedicated ethnologist, Irina Kasparova. One thing that interests me with the Diary of One Who Disappeared is whether the picture of Roma life that Janacek, or rather the poet, presents in it is at all true to life. I mean, what we're presented with is a peasant boy ploughing, a girl, a gypsy girl, flitting through the bushes at the side of the field and distracting him, and we're also given a feeling that she's more sexually liberated than the. I mean, are all these things fantastical notions of Roma life, or are they based in
I think this is what you usually get in the literature or even in songs, in Czech national songs as well. But I think it's not possible to say they are not true, because they are true, but only partly. When Janáček was composing his music, it was about the same. We have the traditional Moravian Roma who call themselves Moravian or Czech Roma, who were settled here by the end of the 19th century and lived settled as other normal people lived in normal huts or normal houses. Most of the Moravian Roma were killed in concentration camps throughout the Second World War. So after the Second World War, we ended up with about 400 Roma who survived. So 90% of the Roma today come from Slovakia, and these were really traveling ever since they left Romania and were living exactly this way of life you described. They would go through the villages, spend 1, 2, 3, 4 days, even a week in one spot. They would trade the things they had for sale, copper or even horses. The women would read your fortune. And they would also steal the chicken. Even my grandmother remembers, or she was telling me when she first heard that I'm going to work in the museum, she said, "Oh, I know the folk. When they were coming through to the village, my mother always shouted, 'Oh, keep the chicken inside, don't let them out,' because it was quite normal that they would take 1 or 2 chicken with them and eat them."
Was the word Cigan a very derogatory word, or not, or was it just a romantic idea? It's not like a racist word in the way that words were used against black people, for example.
When you would call somebody Cigan, that would mean that he is dirty, poor, that he lives in a different manner, that perhaps he's not as worthy as you are, because as soon as you used the word Cigan, you were stating that you yourself are not. Otherwise you would not use it. The Roma among themselves would not call themselves you Cigan and you Cigan.
The other aspect of Janáček's attitude towards the Gypsies in the Diary of One Who Disappeared is this sense of pollution, and particularly of sexual pollution. And in fact, in the music, towards the end of the cycle, although the text speaks of liberation and of him leaving home and being liberated, there's an immense sense of sort of heavy guilt and foreboding almost about it. And is that also, I mean, is that a feature, do you think, of relations between the communities, a fear of that there's no intermarriage and no relationships between?
Well, it actually has two sides, perhaps even the story of the pollution itself to it. Because on one hand, even today, it's not very normal for a majority community member, be it man or a woman, to marry a Roma. Usually you are on the same social level. That means that you are very poor and that you live in more or less the same conditions. And therefore, the ethnic difference is so small that it's not really something which would really much hurt one or the other side of the family. Nevertheless, if you are Roma and you marry a non-Roma, it's something which the family will never forget. So if you were a father or the oldest brother of the family, you had to watch that your sisters and that your mother would stick to the rules of the traditional community. Otherwise, the pollution and the shame would go upon all your bigger family.
Jak spija cyganki
Our cathedral is high, reaching to the vault of the sky. The candles are tall pine trees. 2 people enter the cathedral, and these 2 want to be married. The general wants to marry his little negress, the dear Camilla. And you, my little soul, for me you're above everything, above all the notes I write. You're the holy calm in my soul, but you're also the little fire that gives warmth, which heats up my desires. Everything for you.
Everything for you. He's past the point of no return. But then again, he hasn't. There's yet another mystery. All the biographies describe him stopping halfway through the diary and putting it away in a chest. Nobody's ever explained why. But when I asked John Tyrrell, back in London, the research for his new biography suggested a theory.
We do know that he went off to the Spa of Bohdanic to see his earlier friend, Gabriela Horvatova. And he comes back, tries to write another song, writes to Camilla that he'll be finished soon, and then he stops. And this is the great puzzle. Why does he stop? Because he doesn't just stop for a few days, he stops for 18 months. And I think it's all because of Mrs. Horvatova. Horvatova was the singer who took the main part of the Kostelnička in the Prague production of Jenůfa. And she and Janacek had a rather steamy and ostentatious affair. So he goes off to see Horvatova, having done half the diary, and because he says everything that's on his mind, he tells her about his new friend, he tells her about the new piece he's writing about the new friend, and Horváth was mortified. She doesn't want a younger mistress coming up, and certainly she's had no pieces written about her. So she does her best to get her knife in it. I've got one piece of evidence. At this stage, we've got virtually all of Janacek's letters to Horvátova. We have no letters from Horvátova to him. But he says in one of his letters, the Stössels are good people, you mustn't wrong them. So she's clearly been bad-mouthing. And that's had a disastrous effect upon his new piece. What I think probably needed to happen was for Horvátova to be out of the picture altogether. And the relationship had been deteriorating, particularly after the Vienna production of Jenůfa, where suddenly Janacek sees a fantastic production of his opera, which doesn't have Horvátova as the Kostelnička. And I think at that stage it suddenly occurs to him that she is actually not necessary for his continued success. In December of 1918, the two Stössels come and visit the two Janaceks, and it's a very happy meeting. The two Janaceks are getting on much better now that Horvátova's out of the scene. And Camila, in one of her few letters, writes to Janacek saying what a happy visit it was, that she was so glad to see the sun shining on them again, and she felt as though she was Janacek's daughter. And at last we had a clue that if the four of them, the two Janaceks and the two Stössels, could feel that the relationship between Camila and Janacek was between daughter and father, that was an okay way of proceeding. Within a couple of months after that, he started the diary again.
And everything was fine. But, as we've been told, everything was anything but fine. Or rather, everything was wonderful for Janacek musically. But as for the marriage to Zdenka, well, just look at this photograph.
I feel sorry that as you write, your wife is suffering because of me. Perhaps you should show her more affection. I make no claims on you, but she as your wife has a right to everything. How can your wife feel if you say that you and I are bound together? Do you know what this means?
Jaka ta wspomnienka, gryź pisia miel prawi, cygance mamnienka. Cygance mamnienka, cygano taticzek. Prawdziwych si utal, a drugi maliczek. Skriwane, wiletel zorzesi, moje truchle serce nigdy nie potieši.
Who will comfort my sorrowing heart? Not Camilla, so far as we know. Whenever they met over the next 6 years, it was almost always in company and on neutral territory. The letters poured out of him, over 600 of them, but the intimacy seems to have been all on one side.
There's a letter written just a few months before he died, where he says, "Oh, how much I'd like to hug you," and you just slip away from me. And that's as far as he'd got.
But you can't deny his need of her, at least as what Szczedron calls a pretext. Between their meeting and his death, she was the pretext for 4 operas, 2 symphonic works, 2 string quartets, and the Glagolitic Mass. I wonder if this is what sets him apart from his contemporaries. It seems to me there are composers like Stravinsky who tried to deny any influence of external matters on music. Music was just about music. Was Janacek always a composer for whom the emotional landscape of his life was terribly important in the inspiration of his music?
Já si myslím, že Janáček je určitě jiný typ než Stravinsky. Já se na to dívám podobně jako Stravinsky, že si myslím, že hudba je hudba a emoce jsou emoce. Janáček každopádně ale vždycky svoje emoce nějakým způsobem interpretoval a potřeboval, aby skladba měla nějaké okolí, nějakou atmosféru. Jestli je to Camila, nebo jestli je to nějaký jiný podnět.
Janacek was clearly working himself up into a high state of anxiety, waiting for his gypsy to visit him in his Hochwalde cottage. Camilla's stay was intended to be the climax of their relationship.
Nepřijala. V roce 1928, to bylo v době, kdy už jí tykal, kdy vlastně vrcholil ten emotivní vztah k ní, tak asi už nechtěl ponechat nic náhodě, tak já si myslím, že modernizace interiéru, která začala elektrifikaci domečku v lednu 1928, už byla motivována tou vízí vlastně navštěvy Camily Šteslové. Potom to pokračovalo během dubna a května realizací výstavy vlastně hostovského pokoje, čili prvního patra. A na prázdniny bylo všechno nachystáno.
Camila se odhodlala k té cestě, přijela tam celá rodina Šteslova a nakonec tam zůstala Camila se synem. To je známá věc a řekl bych, že vyvrcholila Janáčkův způsob vedení toho deníku, že protože památník pro Camilu Šteslovou, kterou Janáček vlastně začal takto nějak systematicky jakoby deskribovat i hudebně, tak ten je veden od konce roku, nebo respektive od podzimu roku 1927. Ta činnost pokračuje a my jsme třeba hudebně jsme velmi na rozpacích, jak to máme hodnotit, protože v podstatě je to formou jakýchsi malých klavírních skladbiček, které jsou jakési komentáře k těm situacím, umělecké komentáře. Přitom vůbec stylově jsou v rámci Janáčka velmi, řekl bych, takové, nechci říct primitivní, ale jsou velmi jednoduché, jsou takové, jak na to nejsme zvyklí u Janáčka, že čili chápeme, že se stalo něco nového a že tady tenhle ten proces probíhá. Vyvrcholí to potom skladbou Čekám tě, kterou považujeme za jednu z úplně posledních melodických myšlenek.
Just hear how Janacek imagined their idyllic time together in a letter he wrote while he waited for her to arrive.
I've already painted your stay in Hochwalde so beautifully in my mind that I'm almost frightened that an evil turn of events might thwart these passionate wishes. To dance attendance as a faithful shadow on my Camilka and serve my queen, and let all beautiful dreams float down and come true.
And what happened? If only we had a witness. But we do. We have Camilla's son, Otto.
Jsem přijel prvně s matkou na pozvání Leoše Janáčka, no. Tak jsme tady byli, ovšem už druhý den jsme chtěli odjet matka, poněvadž celou noc Janáček hrál na harmonium, no a tím následkem matka nemohla spát. Tak striktně, tedy dost vulgárně řekla, mistře, musíte přestat brnkat, jinak odjede.
The unsentimental child pouring cold water on Janacek's overheated vision. But it was too late. By now his imagination had completely taken over. But which Camilla is the real one? Janacek's ecstatic vision, or Otto's more down-to-earth memory of his mother? The problem is that for 40 years no one could lay their hands on the evidence.
Samozřejmě, že Kamila Šteslová byla ještě za dob mého mládí, když jsem já studoval, tak byla jakési tabu, protože to bylo dáno tou generací, která ještě zažila paní Janáčkovou, nebo prostě zažila bezprostředně atmosféru doby paní Janáčkové.
For a long time we just didn't know. There were these 700 letters kept rather carefully under wraps in Brno, and little bits of them came out. And of course one imagined all sorts of things. When these letters were eventually published, one suddenly realised how harmless the whole thing was, and the whole thing took place in his mind.
A vím, že existoval dopis, který není uveřejněn nikde, já jsem ho viděl, ten dopis zmizel. Objevil se asi tak před 25 lety a ten dopis v podstatě zakládá takovou jakousi vizi, že ten kontakt proběhl. Je to krátký dopis, kde Janáček popisuje své setkání a ten eventuální kontakt s Kamilou, jakože to bylo jako jarní bouře. Že to je jednoznačný důkaz toho, že prostě došlo k tomu nejvyššímu, k čemu vůbec mohlo dojít. Ovšem, kdo zná Janáčkův poetický slovník a kdo ví, že Janáček často vlastně přestřeluje, a že v podstatě se vyjadřuje jako tak jakýmsi exklamativním způsobem, velmi rychlým, tak to může být do jisté míry i jakási, teď aby mě nebylo špatně rozuměno, forma takového pozitivního exhibicionismu.
So, we still don't know. That letter was lost in the 40-year-long black hole of communist Czechoslovakia. If we're looking for evidence for Janacek's state of mind in his last few months, perhaps it's in the nearby little town of Stromberg. Janacek brought Camilla and Otto here, and their expedition gave rise to a final mystery. The mystery of Janacek's last days. The story is that Otto ran away, and Janacek caught a chill in the rain looking for him. And all the biographies say that this was the cause of his death.
Když jsme byli na návštěvě, tak jsme se měli kočárem, to tenkrát žádný auta nebyly. No a šli jsme nahoru, to je hrozný kopec, protože Janáček chtěl ukázat tu svoji bustu, kterou tam má pod stříškou. A chlubil se, že jediný skladatel, který žije a má pomník. No, tak tam jako, myslím, že to byla vlastně jeho příčina smrti, následující smrti, poněvadž to je hrozný kopec, v jeho letech taková námaha, to bylo, myslím, nad jeho síly a taky jsme se vrátili a asi za 2, za 3 dní dostal horečku a museli ho převést do Ostravy, kde umřel.
So that idyllic final visit to the Hochwalde house became a farewell. And at his bedside was not his wife, Zdenka, but Camilla. Otto wasn't there, so he can't tell us what happened in those final hours. But Stedron has introduced me to one silent witness. It's the memory book, and among the scraps of music and passionate confessions is Janáček's last will.
Ta poslední vůle, takzvaná Janáčkova, je velice zajímavá, protože je součástí památníku pro Kamilu Šteslovou a Janáček zkomplikoval celou situaci právníkům tím, že ji zapsal kontinuálně do erotického, můžeme říct, textu, ve kterém jsou noty a ve kterém jsou drobné skladbičky a najednou se prostě přechází na odkazy a na tantiemy. Proto potom při soudním procesu byla ta takzvaná poslední vůle, protože to je dost problematická poslední vůle, byla vyříznuta a byla součástí toho sporu. Pokud vím, já jsem se tím zabýval jenom na základě existující literatury, tak protistrana, to znamená paní Janáčková, argumentovala vždycky tím, že se tam hovoří o tom, že se nesmí po Janáčkově smrti Kamila znovu vdát. A poukazovalo se na to, že to je svědectvím toho, že Janáček už nebyl při smyslech.
Janáček's attempt to make Camilla his heir was rejected, but she still received royalties from the works she'd inspired. The legal documents are all here in Brno. But in the end, what do we really know? We know now who wrote the poems and why Janáček had such difficulties in finishing the piece. We know the likely circumstances of his death and of his strange bequest to Camilla. But when we hear the music, when we perform it, most of these long-lost facts become irrelevant. What matters is that Janáček found his muse, that Camilla, however improbably, became the gypsy of his imagination, calling into being all those great works which, 80 years later, still call out to us.
Z Bohem rodný kraju, z Bohem nad jedinou, navždy sa rozlučit zbývá mi jedinou. Z Bohem můj tatičku, a i maměnko, z Bohem má sestřičko, mých očí pomněnko.